They say you never know what you have until it's gone. But when you lose $2.1 billion in 72 hours, you know exactly what you had. If you've ever wondered how fast a man can fall from a penthouse to a park bench, and what happens when the universe decides to collect its debts, you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button for stories that stay with you, because what Adrian discovers at rock bottom will change how you see wealth, betrayal, and redemption forever. The yellow tape across the glass doors of Hayes Vanguard Group wasn't just a barrier, it was an obituary. Adrian Hayes stood on the sidewalk of 6th Avenue, the biting autumn wind whipping his Tom Ford overcoat around his legs. Just 72 hours ago, he was the CEO of a $2.1 billion real estate empire. Today, he was the public face of a $180 million federal fraud investigation. The SEC had moved in at 9 a.m. By noon, the FBI had frozen the corporate accounts. By 2 p.m., Adrian learned that his CFO, his best friend, and his brother-in-law, Richard Caldwell, had vanished with the funds earmarked for the Harlem Renaissance Homes project. Richard had set up a labyrinth of shell companies in Delaware and the Caymans, forging Adrian's digital signature on the wire transfers. Adrian had been so blinded by the vision of the project that he hadn't read the fine print. In the eyes of the law, ignorance wasn't an excuse, it was an indictment. Adrian pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. He dialed Victoria. It rang twice. Adrian. Her voice was ice. No panic, no tears. Just the polished, practiced calm of a woman who had already packed her bags. "Vic, where are you? Where's Ethan?" "We're at my mother's place in Greenwich," Victoria said. The background noise was dead silent. She was in a soundproofed room. "My lawyer will be serving you with divorce papers by tomorrow morning. The morality clause in our prenup is ironclad, Adrian. Federal fraud is a felony. Richards stole the money, Vic. You know me. You know I'd never." "I know your name is on the prospectus," she interrupted, her tone surgical. "I know the bank is seizing the Upper East Side townhouse as we speak. And I know that if I stay married to you, my board seats at the Met and the hospital are gone. Don't contact Ethan. My legal team will handle visitation once you're formally charged. Victoria, please. He's my son. Goodbye, Adrian." The line went dead. Adrian stared at the screen until it went black. He couldn't go back to the townhouse. The bank's private security was already there, changing the locks on the mahogany doors. He had exactly one asset left that the feds and the banks hadn't touched. A modest, separate checking account at a local Chase branch he'd opened years ago for petty cash and gym memberships. It wasn't linked to his corporate identity or his joint accounts with Victoria. He walked into a brightly lit diner on 43rd Street, ordered a black coffee he barely touched, and logged into his mobile banking app. Available balance: $3,247.18. $3,000. It was what he used to spend on a single weekend in the Hamptons. Now, it was the exact net worth of Adrian Hayes. He paid for the coffee with a $5 bill, left the change, and walked out. He didn't have a plan. He just started walking north. New York City is a cruel machine. It doesn't pause to mourn the fallen. Cabs splashed puddles of gray slush onto his Italian leather shoes. Businessmen in tailored suits brushed past him, barking into their AirPods, chasing the very same dollars that had just ruined his life. Adrian walked past the glittering storefronts of Midtown, past the towering luxury condos he himself had developed, his mind replaying the forensic accounting reports he'd barely glanced at. Blind trust, he thought bitterly. The most expensive luxury in the world. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the architecture changed. The gleaming glass gave way to the brownstones and brick facades of Upper Manhattan. He crossed into Harlem. This was supposed to be his legacy. The Harlem Renaissance Homes. 1,200 units of genuinely affordable housing, complete with community centers and green spaces. He had wanted to build something that mattered, something that outlasted his balance sheet. Instead, Richard had turned it into a $180 million ghost ship, leaving Adrian to drown in the wake. By 9 p.m., his feet were blistered. The adrenaline had completely burned off, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in his bones. He found himself at the edge of Marcus Garvey Park. The iron gates were open, the pathways lit by the sickly orange glow of sodium street lamps. Adrian walked to a weathered wooden bench beneath a sprawling oak tree and sat down. The wood was damp and freezing, seeping through his slacks, but he didn't have the energy to care. He looked up at the sky. No stars, just the hazy, light-polluted orange underbelly of the city clouds. He was 42 years old. He had no home, no wife, no son, and a federal indictment looming over his head. He pulled his coat tighter, the silence of the park broken only by the distant wail of a police siren and the rumble of the subway beneath his feet. He closed his eyes, wondering if this was how it ended. Just a man freezing on a bench in the very neighborhood he had tried and failed to save. But the thing about rock bottom is that it's solid ground. And sometimes, when you're sitting in the dark, the universe sends a scent to wake you up. It started faint at first, the sharp, smoky tang of Scotch bonnet peppers, the rich caramelized sweetness of frying plantains, the deep, savory aroma of jerk chicken hitting a hot charcoal grill. Adrian opened his eyes. Through the mist of his own breath, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness of the park pathway. A food cart, painted a vibrant, peeling yellow, was rolling to a stop just 20 feet away from his bench. The yellow food cart looked like a beacon in the fog. Hand-painted letters on the side read Mateo's Jerkin Soul, the red and white striped awning, flapping slightly in the November wind. Adrian sat frozen on the bench, his stomach giving a violent, hollow cramp. He hadn't eaten a solid meal in 2 days. The smell of Scotch bonnet peppers, thyme, and rendering chicken fat was intoxicating. It was the smell of life, of warmth, of a world he had been violently evicted from. He pulled his collar up, preparing to close his eyes and ignore the hunger when the vendor flipped on the cart's overhead LED work lights. The harsh white glare cut through the mist and washed over Adrian's face. The man behind the grill froze. He was in his late 30s, wearing a heavy canvas apron over a thermal hoodie, a faded Yankees cap pulled low. He held a pair of steel tongs in one hand, a pair of shears in the other. He stared at Adrian, his eyes narrowing, then widening in sudden stark recognition. The tongs clattered onto the stainless steel prep table. "Mr. Hayes?" the man said. His voice was a rich baritone, laced with the faint, melodic lilt of the Caribbean. Adrian flinched. The name felt like a slap. "I don't have any cash, man," he rasped, his voice cracking from disuse. "I'm just resting my legs. I'll move." "Adrian?" The man stepped out from behind the cart, wiping his hands on a towel. "Adrian Hayes? From Hayes Vanguard?" Adrian looked up, really looking at the man's face. The sharp jawline, the small scar above the left eyebrow. A memory, buried under a decade of board meetings and billion-dollar acquisitions, suddenly surfaced. 2016, 125th Street and Lenox. A young kid with a flimsy, unpermitted pushcart. 2 beat cops flipping it over because he was blocking the sidewalk. Spilled rice, ruined chicken, a kid on his knees crying in the gutter. Adrian had been walking back from a zoning board meeting. He had stopped, pulled out his money clip, and peeled off 10 crisp $100 bills, $1,000. He had handed it to the kid and said, "You didn't lose your business today, son. You just paid your tuition. Get a real cart, get your permits, and when you make it, pull somebody else up." "Mateo?" Adrian whispered. Mateo Rivera closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't look at Adrian's wrinkled Tom Ford suit or the mud on his Italian loafers. He just looked him in the eye. "Man, I've been looking for you. Saw the news. Saw the feds raid your building. The security guard at your lobby told me you walked out with nothing but a gym bag and headed north." Mateo turned back to the cart, his movements suddenly urgent. He grabbed a heavy-duty foam clamshell container and started scooping. "You hungry, Adrian?" I don't have money to pay you, Mateo." Mateo paused, looking over his shoulder. The streetlights caught the fierce, unyielding pride in his eyes. 10 years ago, you didn't ask for my credit score before you handed me $1,000. Sit down and eat." Mateo walked over and handed him the container. It was heavy, radiating heat through the foam. Inside was a mountain of jerk chicken, rice and peas, sweet fried plantains, and a generous ladle of house-made hot sauce. He handed Adrian a plastic spork and a napkin. Adrian took a bite. The heat of the Scotch bonnet hit the back of his throat, followed by the deep, smoky sweetness of the allspice and charcoal. It was, without exaggeration, the best thing he had ever tasted. He ate ravenously, the burning spices chasing away the chill in his bones, the warmth bringing a sudden, stinging prick of tears to his eyes. He blinked them away furiously. Billionaires weren't supposed to cry over takeout. But Adrian wasn't a billionaire anymore. As Adrian ate, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with the weight of a decade. There's an old saying that kindness is the only investment that never fails, that the good you put into the world always finds its way back to you when your own accounts run dry. If this moment, this reminder that our smallest acts of grace can echo across years and save us in our darkest hours, resonates with you, take a second to hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs a little hope today. Because the journey Adrian is about to take isn't just about reclaiming his money, it's about reclaiming his soul. When the container was empty, Adrian set it on the bench beside him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I mean it. I thought I was going to freeze out here." Mateo pulled up a milk crate and sat across from him, resting his elbows on his knees. "Talk to me, Adrian. The news says you stole $180 million from a low-income housing fund. They're calling you the Bernie Madoff of affordable real estate. But I know you. You built your firm on a handshake. You don't steal from the block." So, Adrian talked. He told Mateo about Richard Caldwell, about the shell companies in Delaware, the forged digital signatures, the blind trust. He told him about Victoria's cold, surgical phone call, the morality clause in the prenup, and the freezing of his assets. He told him about the 3,247 18ths sitting in his Chase checking account. When he finished, the park was dead quiet. Mateo didn't offer pity. He didn't shake his head or offer hollow platitudes. Instead, he looked at Adrian with the sharp, calculating gaze of a man who had survived the streets and learned how to read the fine print of life. "You think you're at the end," Mateo said, his voice low and steady. "But you're just at the bottom. And the thing about rock bottom, Adrian, is that it's a solid foundation to build on." Adrian let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Build with what?" "I'm facing federal indictment, Mateo. The SEC is going to bury me. I can't even afford a public defender who knows what a prospectus is." "You don't need a public defender," Mateo said, pulling his smartphone from his apron pocket. "You need a forensic bloodhound. You think I just flip chicken for a living? I took night classes at City College. Got my certificate in community economics. I run 3 of these carts now. Employ 12 guys from the neighborhood, and I sit on the board of the Harlem Small Business Coalition." Mateo tapped the screen, scrolling through his contacts. "When I saw your name on the news, I knew the feds were looking at the wrong side of the ledger. So, I made a call to a friend of mine. She used to be a senior auditor at Deloitte before she got sick of covering up corporate tax evasion. Now, she runs a nonprofit forensic accounting firm out of a brownstone on Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. She hunts shell companies for breakfast." Adrian stared at him, the fog of exhaustion momentarily lifting. "Mateo, I can't pay a Deloitte alum. I have $3,000 to my name." Mateo stood up, tossing the empty foam container into a nearby trash bin. He looked down at Adrian, extending a calloused, scarred hand. "She doesn't work for money anymore, Adrian. She works for justice. And she owes me a favor." Mateo's grip was like a vice as he pulled Adrian to his feet. "Get some sleep on my couch in the back of the commissary kitchen tonight. Tomorrow morning, you're meeting Denise. And tomorrow afternoon, we're going to tear Richard Caldwell's paper empire apart, one invoice at a time." Adrian looked at the hand holding his, then up at the glowing yellow cart. For the first time in 72 hours, the crushing weight in his chest lightened, just a fraction. He wasn't a billionaire. But as he followed Mateo into the Harlem night, Adrian Hayes realized he was no longer bankrupt. Adrian woke to the aggressive hum of an industrial walk-in refrigerator and the sharp scent of bleach masking raw poultry. He was lying on a narrow canvas cot in the back room of Mateo's commissary kitchen in East Harlem. His neck ached, his mouth tasted like copper, and for 3 disorienting seconds, he expected to feel the 1,000-thread count Egyptian cotton of his Upper East Side penthouse. Then reality crashed back in, the SEC, the frozen accounts, the $3,247.18. Mateo pushed through the swinging metal doors, carrying 2 steaming styrofoam cups from the corner bodega. "Drink," he said, handing one over. "It's not a $7 flat white from your Midtown barista, but it'll jumpstart your heart." Adrian took a sip. It was bitter, scalding, and heavily cut with sugar. It was exactly what he needed. "What time is it?" 7 a.m. Denise is expecting us at 8. She doesn't like to be kept waiting, and she doesn't do small talk. 30 minutes later, they were walking down Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. The neighborhood was waking up. Delivery trucks double-parked, the rhythmic thumping of reggaeton from a passing Nissan, the smell of roasted nuts and exhaust fumes. It was chaotic, vibrant, and entirely real, a stark contrast to the sterilized, glass-walled boardrooms where Adrian had spent the last decade. Mateo led him up the stoop of a pre-war brownstone. The brass plaque on the door didn't have a corporate logo, just a name: Okafor Financial Forensics. Inside, the office was a labyrinth of whiteboards covered in complex flowcharts, red string, and printed bank statements. Sitting behind a desk cluttered with 3 glowing monitors was Denise Okafor. She was in her mid-30s, wearing a faded Howard University hoodie, her hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun. She didn't look up when they entered. "You're late," she said, her fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. "Traffic on 125th, Mateo replied smoothly. "Adrian, this is Denise. Denise, the man who bought my first pushcart." Denise finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp, analytical, and entirely devoid of pity. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes. I've been pulling your corporate filings since 4 a.m. Mateo says you're innocent. The SEC says you're a mastermind. Let's look at the math and see who's lying." Adrian sat in the lone guest chair, feeling strangely like a junior analyst facing a hostile audit. "I didn't steal the money, Miss Okafor. Richard Caldwell did. He set up the subcontractor agreements for the Harlem Renaissance project. I signed the master draws, but he controlled the disbursements." "I know," Denise said, tapping a key. The center monitor flared to life, displaying a sprawling web of corporate entities. "Richard isn't a mastermind. He's a mechanic. He used 5 shell LLCs to siphon the funds: Apex Holdings, Blue Ridge Capital, Northstar Ventures, Pacific Rim Partners, and Summit Equity Group. They all share the same registered agent in Wilmington, Delaware, and the same EIN filing timestamp. It's sloppy, but it's effective if the CEO isn't looking." Adrian stared at the screen, a bitter taste rising in his throat. "I trusted him. He was my best man. He's Ethan's godfather." Denise leaned back, steepling her fingers. "They say the deepest cuts come from the knives you didn't see coming. In life, as in business, we often blind ourselves to the red flags of the people we love most, mistaking proximity for loyalty. If this story is making you rethink who you trust with your heart, your legacy, and your blind spots, take a second to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We explore the raw, unfiltered truths of human nature and high-stakes survival every week. And trust me, you won't want to miss the counterattack Adrian is about to launch. "Trust doesn't show up on a balance sheet, Adrian," Denise said, her voice softening just a fraction. "But greed does." Richard moved the $180 million through a classic layering scheme: $47 million to a bank in Singapore, $32 million to a real estate holding firm in Dubai. But that only accounts for $79 million. The SEC thinks the rest is buried in crypto or untraceable cash. "Is it?" Adrian asked. "No," Denise said, a dangerous smirk touching the corner of her mouth. "Money always wants to be found eventually. It wants to be spent. I tracked a $21 million wire that bounced from the Caymans to a shell company in Nevada called Silver State Fiduciary." She clicked her mouse. A new document filled the screen. It was a trust agreement. "Nevada is a secrecy jurisdiction for domestic trusts," Denise explained. "But the registered agent for Silver State is a boutique law firm in Manhattan. I have a friend who works in their mailroom. For $50 and a cup of coffee, he took a photo of the beneficiary disclosure form. Denise hit a key. The document zoomed in on a single typed line at the bottom of the page. Primary beneficiary, Victoria Hayes. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Adrian stared at his wife's name. The letters blurred, then sharpened. His mind raced, connecting dots he had been too heartbroken to see. The sudden coldness on the phone. The immediate invocation of the morality clause in their prenup. The rush to secure full custody of Ethan and lock him out of the Hamptons house. It wasn't just about protecting her social standing or avoiding the SEC's crosshairs. It was a preemptive strike. She knew, Adrian whispered, the words tasting like ash. She knew before the raid. Richard didn't just steal the money for himself. He cut her in. $21 million to walk away clean while I took the federal fall. She played you, Adrian, Mateo said quietly from the corner of the room. She played you for a fool. Adrian sat in silence for a long time. The crushing, suffocating weight of betrayal that had been sitting on his chest for 3 days suddenly shifted. It didn't disappear, but it compressed. It hardened. The grief evaporated, replaced by something cold, sharp, and entirely focused. He looked up at Denise. The hollow, defeated man who had fallen asleep on a park bench was gone. "How long?" Adrian asked, his voice dead steady. "Will it take you to package this into a dossier that the SEC's lead investigator can't ignore?" Denise smiled, a genuine, predatory grin. "Give me 48 hours and a pot of strong coffee. We won't just clear your name, Mr. Hayes. We're going to hand them Richard and Victoria on a silver platter." Adrian stood up, buttoning his wrinkled Tom Ford jacket. "Good, because after we clear my name, we're going to take back the Harlem Renaissance project, and this time we're building it my way." For the next 2 weeks, Adrian Hayes learned that the most important metric in business isn't EBITDA or return on equity. It's the burn rate of a 50-pound bag of charcoal. His hands, once softened by expensive dermatologists and manicured for boardroom handshakes, were now mapped with blisters and faint burn scars. He spent his mornings in the sweltering commissary kitchen, prepping hundreds of pounds of chicken, scoring the meat so Mateo's jerk marinade could penetrate to the bone. By 11 a.m., he was out on the streets of Harlem, manning the register at the yellow cart, learning the brutal, beautiful rhythm of the lunch rush. 2 chicken, 1 oxtail, extra plantains, no slaw. Mateo would bark from the grill, the smoke billowing around him like a halo. "Got it." Adrian would reply, punching the orders into the battered square terminal, making change, and wiping down the stainless steel counter. He wasn't just hiding from the paparazzi and the process servers, he was grounding himself. The physical exhaustion was a mercy. When his muscles ached, his mind didn't have the energy to replay Victoria's betrayal or the sight of the yellow SEC tape across his office doors. It was during the mid-afternoon lulls that Adrian started applying his old life to his new one. He noticed Mateo was throwing away nearly 15% of his perishable inventory every Sunday. Adrian sat on an overturned milk crate with a legal pad and a pencil, calculating the cost of goods sold, COGS, and mapping the foot traffic patterns against the neighborhood's payday cycles. He restructured Mateo's prep schedule, implementing a just-in-time inventory system that cut food waste by half and boosted the cart's net margin by 18% in 4 days. But the real education happened in the interactions. There was Miss Evelyn, an 80-year-old widow who came by every Tuesday and Thursday. Adrian learned to have her usual brown stewed chicken with soft peas because her dentures couldn't handle the crispy jerk skin, ready before she even reached the cart. There was Marcus, a sharp-eyed 14-year-old in an oversized puffer jacket who lingered near the cart after school. One afternoon, Adrian caught Marcus subtly slipping a canned Arizona iced tea into his pocket. Adrian didn't yell. He didn't call the cops. He just walked around the cart, blocked the kid's path, and held out his hand. "The margin on that tea is only 40 cents, Marcus. If you're going to risk a juvenile record, at least steal the oxtail. The margin is $6. Marcus froze, his eyes wide, before slowly pulling the can out and handing it over. "My mom's hours got cut at the hospital," the kid muttered, staring at his sneakers. "We ain't got much in the fridge." Adrian looked at the kid, seeing a reflection of the raw, unpolished hustle that built this city. He handed the tea back, along with a heavy foil container of rice, peas, and chicken. Tell your mom the tea is on the house, but tomorrow you're working off the chicken. You're on dish duty and trash collection. 3 to 6 p.m. $10 an hour plus a meal. You show up late, you're fired. Deal? Marcus looked up, a flicker of pride cutting through the desperation in his eyes. Deal. We spend our entire lives climbing ladders, chasing titles, and accumulating digits in a bank account, convinced that wealth is a fortress that will protect us from the storm. But when the fortress crumbles, you quickly realize that true wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's who you have in your corner. It's the community you've built and the grace you've given away. If this shift in perspective, from net worth to self-worth, is changing how you view your own life, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and share this story. Because the empire Adrian is about to build next won't be made of glass and steel. It will be made of people. By the time the sun dipped below the brownstones, Adrian's apron was stained with grease, and his feet throbbed, but his mind was razor-sharp. He packed up the cart with Mateo and Marcus, walking the heavy rig back to the commissary. When they pushed through the doors, Denise was waiting. She wasn't wearing her usual Howard University hoodie. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored blazer, and sitting on the prep table was a stack of 3 black leather binders, each 3 inches thick. "It's done," Denise said, tapping the top binder. 340 pages, bank records, IP logs, shell company incorporations, and the trust documents. It proves Richard orchestrated the fraud, and it proves Victoria was a knowing beneficiary. It completely exonerates you, Adrian. Adrian stared at the binders, the physical weight of his vindication. "When do we take it to the SEC?" "Tomorrow morning," Denise said. "I got a back-channel meeting with Special Agent Thornton. He's the lead investigator on your case. He's a bulldog, but he cares about the actual law, not just the PR headlines." Adrian nodded, untying his apron. "Good. We hand it over. They arrest Richard and Victoria, and the feds drop the charges against me." He paused, looking at the map of Harlem pinned to the corkboard above the sinks. A large red square marked the 12-acre lot on 145th and Lenox, the Harlem Renaissance site. But what happens to the land? Denise sighed, crossing her arms. The land is tied up in the corporate bankruptcy. Once the SEC and DOJ freeze Richard's assets, the property goes into receivership. Eventually, it'll be auctioned off to the highest bidder to recoup the losses for the defrauded investors. Which means a vulture capital firm from Midtown will buy it for pennies on the dollar. Adrian said, his voice tightening. They'll scrap the affordable housing mandate, rezone it for luxury condos, and price out every single person we just served lunch to today. "That's how the game is played, Adrian," Denise said softly. "You cleared your name. You can walk away. You can take the $3,000 in your checking account, get a job as a consultant, and rebuild." Adrian looked at Mateo, who was quietly wiping down the grill. He thought of Miss Evelyn's soft peas. He thought of Marcus washing dishes in the back, earning an honest $10 an hour to keep his family's fridge from going empty. "No," Adrian said, his voice echoing in the tiled kitchen. "I'm not walking away. I spent 10 years building luxury towers for people who already had 3 homes. This project was supposed to be my legacy. I'm taking the land back." "With what money?" Denise asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're broke, Adrian. The bank won't lend you a dime, and no private equity firm will touch a distressed asset tied to a federal fraud case." Adrian walked over to the corkboard and pulled the red pushpin out of the map. He turned to face them, the ghost of the billionaire CEO finally merging with the street-level grit of the man he had become.
"We don't use private equity,"
Adrian said, a fierce, brilliant light in his eyes. "We use a community land trust. We don't buy the land for the neighborhood. We get the neighborhood to buy the land for itself, and I know exactly how to structure the capital stack to do it." The Jacob K. Javits Federal Building in Lower Manhattan was a fortress of glass and concrete, designed to make anyone walking through its metal detectors feel incredibly small. Adrian Hayes felt smaller than usual. He was wearing his only remaining suit, a charcoal navy Brooks Brothers that Mateo had painstakingly steamed in the commissary kitchen the night before. Beside him, Denise carried the 3 black leather binders. They weighed nearly 15 pounds combined. 15 pounds of paper that held the power to either end Adrian's life in a federal penitentiary or give it back to him. They were escorted to a windowless conference room on the 14th floor. The air smelled of stale coffee and ozone from the copier. Special Agent James Thornton walked in 5 minutes later. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the 2008 financial crisis. His tie was loosened, his eyes were bagged, and he carried a thick manila folder with Adrian's name on it. "Mr. Hayes," Thornton said, not offering a hand. "Your lawyer advised you to take the 5th, yet here you are, and you brought an auditor. I have exactly 20 minutes before I have to brief the U.S. Attorney on your indictment." "I'm not here to take the 5th, Agent Thornton," Adrian said, his voice steady, echoing off the cinder block walls. "I'm here to give you the architect." Denise didn't say a word. She just stepped forward and dropped the 3 binders onto the center of the mahogany table. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was heavy, final. 640 pages, Denise said, her voice cutting through the sterile room. Bank records, IP routing logs, Delaware Incorporation timestamps, and a beneficiary disclosure from a Nevada secrecy trust. Richard Caldwell didn't just embezzle the $180 million. He layered it through 5 shell LLCs, and he didn't do it alone. Thornton frowned, pulling the first binder toward him. He flipped it open. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. He stopped. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket and leaned closer to the paper. There is a profound, almost terrifying power in watching the untouchable finally get touched. In a city where money usually acts as a shield against consequences, seeing the cold, hard math of forensic accounting strip away, a liar's armor is a rare kind of justice. If you believe that the truth is the ultimate equalizer, and you want to keep reading stories about people who refuse to let the corrupt rewrite the rules, take a second to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Because the war for the soul of this neighborhood is just beginning, and you won't want to miss the counteroffensive. Thornton looked up, his expression shifting from bureaucratic exhaustion to sharp, predatory focus. This trust, Silver State Fiduciary. The primary beneficiary is Victoria Hayes, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Adrian said, the words tasting like copper. She invoked the morality clause in our prenup to lock me out of my son's life and secure her social standing, while quietly sitting on $21 million of stolen federal housing funds. Thornton closed the binder. He looked at Adrian for a long, silent moment. The hostility in the agent's eyes was gone, replaced by the grim respect of a professional who had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. "Mr. Hayes," Thornton said quietly, "as of this moment, you are no longer a target of this investigation. You are a cooperating witness." Adrian let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 weeks. The crushing weight on his chest fractured. He wasn't going to prison. He wasn't a fraud. "Where is Caldwell?" Adrian asked. Thornton checked his watch. Right about now, a tactical team should be intercepting him at Terminal 4 at JFK. He was trying to board an Emirates flight to Dubai with 3 fake passports and a suitcase full of bearer bonds. "He's not a mastermind, Mr. Hayes. He's just a thief who got greedy." Adrian nodded, a cold, hard satisfaction settling in his gut. But as they walked out of the federal building and into the biting wind of the financial district, his phone buzzed. It was an alert from a legal tracking app Denise had installed on his burner phone. He stopped on the pavement, staring at the screen. The color drained from his face. "What is it?" Denise asked, pulling her coat tighter against the wind off the Hudson. "The bankruptcy judge just unsealed the asset liquidation docket for Hayes Vanguard," Adrian said, his voice tight. "The Harlem Renaissance land. The 12 acres on 145th and Lenox. It's being put up for blind auction." Denise pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen as she accessed the court database. 14 days, she said, looking up, her eyes wide. Adrian, the auction is in exactly 14 days. The minimum bid is set at $12 million to cover the secured creditors. Who's bidding? Denise scrolled down the registered bidder list. Apex Development, a vulture capital firm out of Midtown. If they win, they'll use their political connections to rezone the lot. They'll bulldoze the affordable housing mandate and build luxury glass condos. The neighborhood gets priced out. Miss Evelyn, Marcus, Mateo's guys, they all lose. Adrian looked north toward Harlem. The physical chains of the SEC investigation had just been broken, but a new, heavier chain was snapping into place. Clearing his name wasn't the end of the story. It was just the prologue. If he walked away now, he would be a free man, but he would be a coward. He would be the man who let his community be paved over because he didn't have the capital to fight back. "We need $12 million, Adrian said, his mind shifting from the defensive crouch of a criminal suspect back into the aggressive, calculating posture of a developer. "And we have 14 days to raise it." "Adrian, you have $3,000 in your checking account," Denise said gently. "You can't syndicate a $12 million capital stack in 2 weeks. Not with your reputation still in the gutter. The institutional money won't touch you." "I don't want institutional money," Adrian said, his eyes locking onto hers, burning with a fierce, unyielding light. "Institutional money demands a return that forces you to cut corners. I want the neighborhood's money. I want the community land trust. We're going to crowdsource the equity from the very people Apex Development is trying to evict, and we're going to leverage it with a municipal impact grant." Denise stared at him, realizing he was dead serious. "You want to ask the poorest zip code in Manhattan to fund a $12 million real estate acquisition? I'm not going to ask them for charity," Adrian said, turning and walking toward the subway, his stride longer, faster, filled with a resurrected purpose. "I'm going to offer them ownership. Come on. We have a lot of prep work to do, and I need to get back to the cart. Marcus is working the grill today, and I can't be late." The battle for his freedom was over. The war for his soul, and the soul of Harlem, had just begun. By day 12 of the 14-day deadline, the commissary kitchen looked less like a commercial prep space and more like the war room of a desperate political campaign. The stainless steel prep tables were buried under topographical maps of Harlem, printed zoning ordinances, and half-eaten containers of jerk chicken. On the main whiteboard, written in thick red dry erase marker, was a single, unforgiving number: 12,000,000. Beneath it, in green, was their current tally: $9,412,500. Adrian stared at the board, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Over the past 11 days, he had pitched the Harlem Community Landage to every credit union, local church, and impact fund on the eastern seaboard. They had scraped together nearly $10 million. It was a miracle of grassroots finance. Mateo had liquidated his 401 Miss Evelyn had cashed out a modest life insurance policy. Marcus had organized a neighborhood car wash and bake sale that somehow pulled in $4,000 in crumpled bills. But the math was a brutal, unforgiving master. They were still $2.5 million short of the minimum bid required to enter the blind auction for the 12-acre lot, and Apex Development, the vulture capital firm circling the asset, had just launched a smear campaign in the local press, painting Adrian as a disgraced billionaire trying to scam the working class one last time. "They're trying to break our momentum," Denise said, slamming her laptop shut. She looked as exhausted as Adrian felt. "Apex knows we're close. If we don't hit the 12 million threshold by 5 p.m. tomorrow, the bankruptcy judge will disqualify our bid. Apex gets the land for pennies, and they'll bulldoze the community center blueprint by Monday." Adrian rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble he hadn't shaved in 3 days. "We need an anchor investor. Someone to bridge the gap. But every institutional fund I call wants a guaranteed 8% return and a seat on the board. If I give them that, it defeats the entire purpose of the land trust. The neighborhood loses control." Mateo walked in from the back, carrying a tray of coffees. He set them down and looked at the board. "You're thinking like a CEO, Adrian. You're looking for one guy with a big check. Stop looking up. Look around. Adrian frowned. What do you mean? Tonight is the town hall at Mount Olivet, Mateo said, tapping the table. You've been pitching to suits in glass towers. Tonight you pitch to the block. Let them see you. Not the guy from the Forbes magazine cover, but the guy who's been flipping chicken and taking out the trash for the last month. That evening, the basement of Mount Olivet Baptist Church was packed to the fire code limit. Over 400 people showed up. There were nurses coming off double shifts, teachers, bodega owners, and teenagers like Marcus, who was standing in the back with his smartphone mounted on a cheap tripod, live streaming the event to the neighborhood's social media pages. When Adrian stepped up to the microphone, the room went dead silent. The skepticism in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. They had seen the news. They knew his name was mud. Adrian didn't use a PowerPoint. He didn't use terms like EBITDA or capital stack. He just gripped the edges of the wooden podium and looked out at the sea of faces. 3 weeks ago, I lost everything, Adrian began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I lost my company, my home, and my family. I thought I was a billionaire, but I was just a guy holding on to a very expensive illusion. When I fell, the only person who caught me was a man who sold food on the corner of 125th. He gestured to Mateo, who gave a slight nod from the front row. Apex Development wants to buy the land on 145th Street. Adrian continued, his voice rising, finding its rhythm. They want to build glass towers with doormen and rooftop dog parks, and they want to charge $3,000 a month for a studio. They look at Harlem and they see a return on investment. But we look at Harlem and we see our home. He paused, letting the silence hang. I am not asking for your charity tonight. I am asking for your partnership. A community land trust means the neighborhood owns the dirt. The trust owns the land, and you own the homes on top of it. It means when the city tries to rezone, you have the deed to tell them to go to hell. It means your kids can afford to live in the zip code they grew up in. I need $2.5 million to match the community fund and lock this bid. If you give $500, you own a piece of the foundation. If you give $50, you own a brick. We buy it together, or we lose it to them forever. There is a pervasive myth in our culture that David cannot beat Goliath without a slingshot made of gold. We are conditioned to believe that real power only flows downward from the top of the skyscraper, never upward from the pavement. But true power isn't about the size of the check. It's about the unbreakable solidarity of a community that refuses to be erased. If this story is reminding you that the most valuable currency in the world is collective belief, take a second to hit that subscribe button and share this video. Because the climax of Adrian's fight isn't just about saving a piece of land. It's about proving that the people are the ultimate anchor investors. When Adrian finished, there was a beat of absolute silence. Then Miss Evelyn stood up from the second row. She walked to the front, pulled a checkbook from her purse, and wrote a check for $200, her entire monthly grocery budget. She handed it to Denise. I'm buying my bricks, she said, her voice trembling, but loud. That broke the dam. People lined up. It wasn't the sleek, silent transfer of wire funds Adrian was used to in his past life. It was loud, chaotic, and deeply personal. People handed over cash, money orders, and checks. Mateo was at the table, writing out receipts, his eyes shining. Marcus kept the camera rolling, panning across the faces of his neighbors, taking back their future. By midnight, Denise tallied the final numbers on her laptop. She looked up at Adrian, her face pale in the glow of the screen. We raised $600,000 tonight, she said softly, which puts us at just over $10 million. We're still short, Adrian. The auction is at noon tomorrow. We need $2 million more, or the judge throws out our bid. Adrian slumped into a folding chair, the adrenaline crashing out of his system. They had fought so hard. The community had given everything they had. But the cold, hard reality of high-stakes real estate was closing in. They were going to lose at the finish line. Suddenly, Marcus jogged over from the back of the hall, holding up his phone. Mr. Hayes! Mr. Hayes! Look at this! Adrian rubbed his eyes and took the phone. It was the live stream Marcus had been broadcasting. The viewer count, which had hovered around 300 for most of the night, was now sitting at 142,000. The video of your speech went viral on Twitter and TikTok. Marcus said, his eyes wide. People are sharing it everywhere, and look at the comments. Adrian scrolled. Thousands of comments. People from Brooklyn, from Chicago, from Atlanta. People who had been priced out of their own neighborhoods, sharing their own stories of gentrification and loss. Then Denise's phone rang. The sharp trill cut through the exhausted murmur of the church basement. She looked at the caller ID and frowned. "It's a Chicago area code," she said, answering it on speaker. Denise Okafor, Mims Okafor, a crisp, professional female voice echoed through the phone. "This is Sarah Lynn, managing partner at the Horizon Impact Fund. My team just watched the live stream of Mr. Hayes' town hall. We specialize in anti-displacement capital. We don't want a board seat, and we don't want an 8% return. We want a 2% capped yield and a guarantee that the land stays in the trust in perpetuity." Denise stopped breathing. Adrian stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. "How much, Ms. Lynn?" Denise asked, her voice tight. "We are prepared to wire $2.5 million into your escrow account by 8 a.m. tomorrow," Sarah Lynn said, "provided Mr. Hayes is ready to sign the covenant." Adrian looked at Mateo. He looked at Marcus, still holding the phone. He looked at Miss Evelyn, who was asleep in the second row, her coat pulled over her shoulders. "Tell her yes," Adrian whispered, a fierce, triumphant smile breaking across his face. "Tell her we'll see Apex Development at the auction. The United States Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York, located on Pearl Street, smells faintly of floor wax and old paper. It is a building where dreams are liquidated and neighborhoods are carved up into line items." At 11:45 a.m., Adrian sat at the plaintiff's table in courtroom 402. He wore his steamed Brooks Brothers suit. To his left was Denise, her laptop open, displaying the wire transfer confirmation from the Horizon Impact Fund. To his right was Mateo, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a borrowed navy blazer, his calloused hands resting flat on the mahogany table. Across the aisle sat the legal team for Apex Development. There were 4 of them, wearing $5,000 Tom Ford suits, looking bored. They hadn't even brought a community liaison or a PR rep. To them, the Harlem Renaissance lot wasn't a neighborhood. It was just a distressed asset on a spreadsheet. Judge Elena Rostova took the bench at exactly noon. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the 2 tables. "We are here to unseal the final bids for the commercial property located at 145th and Lenox Avenue, currently in receivership. I have the 2 sealed envelopes before me. I will read the highest qualifying bid and award the deed." The courtroom held its collective breath. Marcus was in the back row, his phone propped up, live streaming to an audience that had now swelled to over 300,000 viewers. Judge Rostova sliced open the first envelope. Apex Development submits a cash bid of $12,100,000. A smug, barely perceptible smile touched the lead Apex lawyer's face. It was a lowball offer, just barely over the minimum, banking on the fact that no grassroots coalition could clear the institutional hurdles in time. The judge sliced open the second envelope. She paused. Her eyes flicked up from the paper, looking directly at Adrian, then down at the document again. The Harlem Community Land Trust submits a bid of $12,500,000. Judge Rostova read, her voice echoing in the silent room. Accompanied by a fully funded escrow account, a municipal endorsement from the City Housing Authority, and a binding community benefits agreement. The Apex lawyer shot out of his chair. "Your Honor, we request a recess to counterbid. Our client is prepared to match." "Overruled," Judge Rostova said sharply, her gavel hovering. "This is a sealed bid auction. Counsel, not a flea market. The trust's bid is higher, fully capitalized, and meets all statutory requirements for the receivership." She brought the gavel down. Crack! The property is awarded to the Harlem Community Land Trust. Court is adjourned. Mateo let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. Denise slammed her laptop shut, massive, uncharacteristic grin breaking across his face. Adrian didn't cheer. He just closed his eyes, feeling the phantom weight of the last 3 weeks finally lift off his shoulders. They had done it. The dirt belonged to the block. In a system that is often rigged to favor the deepest pockets, watching a community outmaneuver a corporate giant feels like a myth. We are taught that David only beats Goliath if he has a better slingshot. But true power doesn't come from the size of your war chest. It comes from the unbreakable solidarity of people who refuse to be erased. If you believe that justice isn't just something you buy, but something you build together, take a second to hit that subscribe button and share this story. Because while Adrian just won the war for his neighborhood, the universe was about to collect a very different kind of debt. While Adrian was shaking hands in the marble hallway of the courthouse, a black SUV with federal plates was pulling into the circular driveway of a sprawling, cedar-shingled estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Victoria Hayes was sitting at her vanity, sipping a matcha latte and reviewing the final drafts of her divorce settlement. She was already planning the press release that would frame her as the tragic, resilient ex-wife of a disgraced fraudster. She didn't hear the heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor until her mother's housekeeper burst into the bedroom, pale and trembling. "Victoria, there are men here. They have badges." Before Victoria could stand, Special Agent Thornton stepped into the doorway, flanked by 2 tactical officers. "Victoria Hayes?" Thornton asked, his voice devoid of the polite bureaucracy he had used with Adrian. "Yes. What is the meaning of this?" "My lawyer is David Sterling at Skadden Arps, and I will not speak to you without." "You have the right to remain silent," Thornton interrupted, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and the embezzlement of federal housing funds." Victoria froze. The matcha latte slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor, splattering green across her pristine white rug. "This is a mistake. My husband committed the fraud. I invoked the morality clause. I'm the victim here. The morality clause in your prenup doesn't cover the $21 million you accepted into the Silver State Fiduciary Trust," Thornton said coldly, stepping forward and spinning her around. The cold steel clicked around her wrists. "And your co-conspirator, Richard Caldwell, is currently sitting in a holding cell at MDC Brooklyn. He flipped on you at 6:00 a.m. this morning to avoid a life sentence. You're not the victim, Mrs. Hayes. You're the bagman." As they marched her out of the mansion, past the manicured hedges and the stunned neighbors, Victoria looked back at the house she had traded her family to keep. It looked exactly like what it was, a beautiful, empty box. Back in Lower Manhattan, Adrian walked out of the Pearl Street courthouse and into the crisp afternoon sun. The flashing cameras of the local press were waiting, but for the first time in his life, Adrian didn't care about the headlines. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Adrian. It's David Sterling. Victoria has been taken into federal custody. The prenup is voided by her criminal indictment. I have Ethan with me at the firm. He's asking for his dad. When can you come get him?" Adrian stopped on the pavement. The noise of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the shouting reporters faded into a dull hum. He looked at the text, his thumb hovering over the screen. He thought of the empty penthouse, the cold boardrooms, and the little boy who used to wait by the window for a father who was always on a conference call. He typed his reply, his fingers steady and sure. "I'm on my way. Tell him we're going to get some jerk chicken." Adrian slipped the phone back into his pocket, looked up at the skyline, and began the long walk toward the subway. He didn't have $2 billion anymore. But as he swiped his MetroCard and descended into the bustling, vibrant heart of the city, Adrian Hayes knew with absolute certainty that he was finally a rich man. The lobby of the Skadden Arps law firm was a masterpiece of intimidation. Floors of polished Nero Marquina marble, walls of frosted glass, and a silence so expensive it felt like a physical weight pressing against your eardrums. Adrian sat on a minimalist leather sofa, his hands resting on his knees. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of scuffed Red Wing boots Mateo had convinced him to buy at a surplus store in Brooklyn. He looked entirely out of place, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care. The elevator doors chimed, sliding open with a soft hydraulic whisper. David Sterling, the high-priced divorce attorney who had tried to bury him, stepped out. Beside him was Ethan, 8 years old, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Adrian's current monthly rent, and carrying a small leather duffel bag. The boy looked small, pale, and deeply confused. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of federal agents, sudden moves, and his mother's unexplained absence. Adrian stood up, his heart, which had remained steady through SEC raids and blind auctions, hammered violently against his ribs. "Hey, buddy," Adrian said, his voice thick. Ethan looked at David Sterling, then back at his father. He dropped the duffel bag and ran. Adrian caught him, dropping to his knees on the cold marble, burying his face in his son's shoulder. Ethan smelled like expensive shampoo and the faint, sterile scent of a life lived. Entirely indoors, he was trembling.
"Where's Mom?"
Ethan whispered into Adrian's neck. Adrian closed his eyes, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had spent the last 14 months building a fortress of legal and financial armor to protect this neighborhood, but nothing could armor a father against the pain of his child's grief. Mom had to go away for a while, Ethan. She made some choices that the law doesn't allow. But I'm here. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Sterling cleared his throat, adjusting his Rolex. "The judge granted you full emergency custody, Mr. Hayes. Given Mrs. Hayes's incarceration at FPC Alderson and Mr. Caldwell's cooperation agreement, the state deemed you the only viable parent. I've transferred his medical and school records to your current address." Sterling's eyes flicked over Adrian's flannel shirt with barely concealed pity. "If you need anything else, my office will bill the trust." "We're good, David," Adrian said, standing up and taking Ethan's hand. "Keep the change." They walked out of the glass tower and into the biting wind of Midtown. Adrian didn't hail a cab. He led Ethan down the concrete stairs into the subway station. Ethan stared at the turnstiles, his eyes wide. "Dad, where's the car? Where's Hector?" Hector was their former driver. "Hector doesn't work for us anymore, kiddo," Adrian said, swiping his Metro card and pushing the boy gently through the turnstile. "Today, we're taking the A train. It's faster, and it goes right to our new home." The subway platform was a chaotic symphony of screeching brakes, buskers playing buckets, and the rush of displaced air. When the train arrived, they stepped into a car that smelled of ozone and wet wool. Ethan sat close to Adrian, watching the diverse, vibrant tapestry of New York City swipe past the windows. A woman with a cello, a teenager reading a manga, a construction worker covered in drywall, dust. It was messy, it was loud, it was real. When they emerged at the 125th Street station in Harlem, the afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across the brownstones. Adrian led Ethan 3 blocks to the corner where the yellow cart was parked. Mateo was flipping plantains, the smoke billowing in the crisp air. When he saw Adrian holding the boy's hand, Mateo stopped. He wiped his hands on his apron, walked around the cart, and knelt down so he was eye level with Ethan. "You must be Ethan," Mateo said, his voice a warm, gentle rumble. "Your dad has told me you like spicy food." Ethan looked at his dad, then back at Mateo. "I like chicken nuggets." Mateo grinned, a wide, brilliant smile. "Nuggets are for amateurs. Let me introduce you to the real deal." 10 minutes later, Ethan was sitting on a milk crate, tearing into a jerk chicken wing, his face smeared with orange sauce, coughing slightly from the Scotch bonnet heat, but laughing as Mateo handed him a cold jar of mango agua fresca. Adrian stood a few feet away, watching them. He thought about the $2.1 billion empire he had lost. He thought about the penthouse with the panoramic views of Central Park, where he and Ethan had lived in the same house, but existed in different time zones. He had spent a decade trying to build a legacy out of glass and steel, thinking that if he built it high enough, his son would look up to him. But looking at Ethan now, laughing, with a street vendor in a neighborhood Adrian had once only viewed as a development opportunity, Adrian realized the fundamental flaw in his old architecture. You don't build a legacy upward. You build it downward. You build it into the dirt, into the roots, into the people. We spend our entire lives chasing the illusion of arrival. We believe that if we just get the right title, the right zip code, and the right number in our bank account, we will finally be safe from the storms of life. But the truth is, the fortress you build to keep the world out is the exact same fortress that locks you in. True wealth isn't found in the isolation of a penthouse. It's found in the messy, beautiful, interconnected web of a community that knows your name. If this realization, that the things we chase are rarely the things that save us, is shifting your perspective on what it means to be truly rich, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone you love. Because the empire Adrian Hayes was about to oversee next wouldn't be measured in billions, but in something far more permanent. 14 months later, the scaffolding finally came down. Adrian stood on the sidewalk of 145th and Lenox, a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints tucked under his arm. Above him rose the Marcus Garvey Community Homes. It wasn't a glass monolith. It was a sprawling 6-story complex of warm terracotta brick, reclaimed timber, and cascading vertical gardens. The ground floor was entirely given over to the community. A subsidized grocery cooperative, a daycare center, and a massive commercial kitchen that Mateo now used to train at-risk youth in the culinary arts. The courtyard was alive. It was a Saturday afternoon in late April. Music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker. Kids were chasing each other through the splash pad. Adrian walked through the glass doors of the lobby. There was no doorman in a uniform. Instead, there was a community desk staffed by residents. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," said Mrs. Gable, a retired teacher who sat at the desk. "Morning, Sarah. How's the garden committee doing?" "Meeting at 3. We're arguing over whether to plant collards or tomatoes this year." "Tell them to plant both. I'll buy the seeds." Adrian smiled. He took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked down the hall to apartment 4B. He knocked. The door opened, revealing Miss Evelyn. She was 81 now, leaning on a cane, but her eyes were sharp and bright. Behind her, the apartment was immaculate, filled with sunlight and the smell of baking bread. "Adrian, come in," she fussed, waving him inside. "I was just about to bring some banana bread down to the community room." "You're spoiling us, Evie," Adrian said, accepting a slice wrapped in foil. He looked around the apartment. It was fully ADA compliant, with wide doorways and grab bars in the bathroom. In her old place, a walk-up in Washington Heights, she had been trapped on the 3rd floor, unable to navigate the stairs when her arthritis flared up. Here, she had an elevator, a community, and a view of the courtyard where she could watch the children play. "You know," Miss Evelyn said, looking out the window, "my grandson came to visit yesterday. He asked me how much my rent was. When I told him it was 30% of my fixed income, he thought I was lying. He said in Brooklyn he pays $3,000 for a closet." Adrian chuckled. "That's the beauty of the land trust, Evie. The land belongs to the neighborhood. Nobody can buy it out from under you. You're home." Leaving her apartment, Adrian took the stairs down to the ground floor and walked out to the construction staging area on the east side of the lot, where Phase 2 was just breaking ground. A teenager in a yellow hard hat was reviewing a tablet with the site foreman. It was Marcus. He was 15 now, taller, his shoulders broader. He had spent the last year working every afternoon and weekend on the site, learning the trades, learning the math, learning how to read a Gantt chart. "Marcus," Adrian called out, "how are the concrete pours looking for the foundation?" Marcus looked up, tapping the screen. "We're slightly behind on the curing time because of the rain last week, but the foreman says we can make it up by running a Saturday shift. I already called the crew. They're good with the overtime." Adrian nodded, a swell of profound pride tightening his chest. "Good man. Keep an eye on the rebar spacing. If the inspector flags it, it'll cost us a week." "I already checked it twice, Mr. Hayes," Marcus said with a confident smirk. "It's perfect." Adrian walked away, heading toward the site office. His official title was Executive Director of the Harlem Community Land Trust. His salary was $85,000 a year. It was less than he used to spend on his corporate Amex in a single quarter. He drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks away, where he and Ethan cooked dinner together every night. He had never been happier. The illusion of his past life didn't truly shatter until a rainy Tuesday in November. Adrian was sitting in a local diner near 116th Street, reviewing a stack of grant applications over a cup of black coffee. The bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in, shaking off a very expensive, very wet Burberry trench coat. It was Julian Vance, a former managing partner at a private equity firm Adrian used to play squash with at the exclusive Equinox Club in Midtown. Julian looked older, his hairline receding, the skin beneath his eyes bruised with the chronic exhaustion of a man who trades his life for basis points. Julian spotted Adrian and froze. He walked over, his eyes scanning Adrian's flannel shirt and the scuffed boots. "Adrian, my God, is that you?" Julian asked, sliding into the booth uninvited. "Julian, it's been a while," Adrian said, closing his folder. I heard about what happened. The SEC, the wife, terrible business. I saw the article in the Journal about the land trust." Julian signaled the waitress for a coffee, then leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, man, I know you're playing the noble martyr right now, doing this nonprofit thing to rebuild your reputation, but my firm is launching a new distressed asset fund. We need a guy who knows the city zoning board inside and out. We can get you back in the game. $200K base plus carry. You don't have to live in, well, here." Adrian looked at Julian. He looked at the Patek Philippe ticking on Julian's wrist. He remembered the feeling of that watch, the heavy, cold weight of it. He remembered the panic attacks at 3 a.m., the fear of the market dipping, the hollow victories, the silent dinners with Victoria, the missed birthdays. "Julian," Adrian said gently, "do you know what happened to Richard and Victoria?" Julian blinked, thrown off balance. Richard got 15 years in federal prison. Victoria got 5, plus she was disbarred from every corporate board in the state. The feds clawed back every dime. Why? Because they thought the money was the prize, Adrian said. They thought if they had enough of it, they could insulate themselves from the world. But money is just a magnifying glass, Julian. If you're empty inside, it just makes your emptiness bigger. Adrian slid out of the booth, leaving a $5 bill on the table for his coffee. "I'm not playing a role, Julian, and I don't want back in the game. I won the only thing that mattered." Julian stared at him, genuinely bewildered. "You're managing a charity in Harlem, Adrian. You're worth less than $100,000. You lost." Adrian smiled, a genuine warm expression that reached his eyes. "No, Julian, I just finally figured out the math." He walked out of the diner and into the rain, feeling lighter than air. The ghost of his past had finally been exorcised. He didn't hate Victoria anymore. He didn't hate Richard. He just pitied them. They were still trapped in the maze, running toward a finish line that didn't exist, while Adrian had simply stepped out of the maze entirely. That night, the rain cleared, leaving the sky above New York washed clean and biting cold. Adrian walked into Marcus Garvey Park. The iron gates were open. The sodium street lamps cast long, familiar shadows across the pavement. He walked to the exact spot beneath the sprawling oak tree. The weathered wooden bench was still there. He sat down. The wood was damp and freezing, seeping through his jeans, just as it had on the worst night of his life 3 years ago. But this time, he wasn't shivering. He wasn't running. He was just sitting. A few minutes later, the familiar, rhythmic squeak of wheels echoed through the quiet park. The yellow cart rolled into the halo of the street lamp. Mateo parked it, locked the brakes, and walked over carrying 2 steaming foam clamshells. He sat down next to Adrian, handing him a container. The smell of Scotch bonnet, thyme, and charcoal smoke rose into the cold air. "You know," Mateo said, popping open his own container, "you don't have to come sit out here in the cold, man. You got a nice apartment. You got a kid waiting for you at home. You got a warm bed." Adrian took a bite of the chicken. "It was perfect. I know. But I like to come back here. It keeps me grounded." They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the distant hum of the city. The sirens were still there, the rumble of the subway was still beneath their feet, but it no longer sounded like a machine grinding people down. It sounded like a heartbeat. "Adrian," Mateo said after a while, staring out at the dark silhouette of the park. "I've been thinking about that night. The night I found you on this bench. You had $3 grand to your name. The feds were hunting you. Your wife had betrayed you. Your life was over." Mateo turned to look at him, his dark eyes serious. "If you could go back, if you could stand in your office on the 42nd floor, look at the yellow tape and change one thing, what would it be? Would you have read the fine print? Would you have fired Richard? Would you have saved the $2 billion? Adrian stopped chewing. He looked down at the foam container in his hands. He thought about the penthouse. He thought about the board meetings. He thought about the hollow, echoing silence of a life built entirely on the pursuit of more. Then he thought about Ethan laughing on the subway. He thought about Miss Evelyn's sunlit apartment. He thought about Marcus, reading a blueprint with the confidence of a young man who knows he owns his future. He thought about Denise, fighting for justice in a cramped brownstone. He thought about the $3,247 that had bought him a cup of coffee and the humility to walk north. "No, Adrian," said softly. Mateo raised an eyebrow. "No? You'd let Richard steal it all again? You'd let Victoria betray you?" "I wouldn't change a single thing," Adrian said, his voice steady, carrying the absolute certainty of a man who has stared into the abyss and found a ladder. "If I hadn't lost the $2 billion, I would never have found out what I was actually worth." Mateo smiled, a slow, deep expression of understanding. He bumped his shoulder against Adrian's. "So, what's the net worth of Adrian Hayes today?" Adrian looked up. Through the bare branches of the oak tree, the clouds had parted. For the first time in a long time, you could see the stars shining faintly above the light pollution of the city. "I have a son who knows I'll be at his school plays," Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have a community that would catch me if I fell. I have a home that I didn't just buy but built with my own 2 hands. And I have a friend who brought me jerk chicken on a freezing night when I had nothing." Adrian closed the foam container and set it on the bench. He looked at Mateo, his eyes bright and clear. "I'm the richest man in New York." Mateo laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the brick buildings surrounding the park. "Damn right you are. Now eat your plantains before they get cold, billionaire." Adrian smiled, picking up his plastic spork. The city roared around them, vast and indifferent, but on that small wooden bench under the Harlem sky, everything was exactly as it should be. He had lost an empire only to inherit the earth. They say that when the universe wants to change your life, it first breaks your heart. It strips away the titles, the bank accounts, and illusions, leaving you with nothing but the raw, unpolished truth of who you are. Adrian Hayes had to lose $2 billion to realize that the only things you truly own are the things you give away. So, I leave you with this question. If tomorrow the world stripped you of your wealth, your status, and your comfort, who would be left standing beside you? And more importantly, what have you done today to deserve them? If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that kindness is the only currency that never depreciates, please hit that subscribe button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The question at the end is going to divide the room, but the answer will define your life. Until next time, stay grounded, stay kind, and never forget the way home.